Hey, good morning. My name's James Casson. I'm the headmaster of First Baptist Classical Academy. Come on in. I would like to introduce Pastor Joshua. He will be conducting our tour today.
Yeah, my name is Pastor Joshua Claycamp. I'm the pastor at First Baptist Church, and we just want to say on behalf of all of the parents and students here at First Baptist Classical Academy that we're excited to have you today, and we're grateful that you're interested and curious to know more about classical education. The method of instruction in terms of modern education, what you find in public schools today, is actually quite new. It's only been around for about the last century or so, and there are fundamental worldview differences between classical education versus modern education. The classical method of education was the method of education that had been used for nearly the past millennium. It's only very, very recently that we've started this new system of education that what we find today in public schools. But just to kind of highlight some of the differences, when it comes to public education, the philosophy that's really dominated over the last 75 years or so is this idea that the child is a blank slate, what they refer to as the tabula rasa, this idea that it's just a blank slate and we're here to form the child, to instill knowledge and information into the child. And as that philosophy of education has continued to permeate and gain wider acceptance and influence within the public education system, we see today that even though there are certain things that are taught to students, the idea is still very much so that the student can be self-determinative. They get to choose who they are, they get to choose what they are. And we see this value reflected even in the manner of education. So for example, here in British Columbia, if you were to go to a kindergarten or grade 1 classroom in the public education system, they're teaching basic things such as the boiling point of water. And so when it comes to a science experiment targeting kindergarten students or grade 1 students with regards to the boiling point of water, they will begin that lesson by asking the student, what do you think is going to happen? They'll allow the student to speak to it. And the idea here is that the student needs to consider the questions that they're being confronted with and first evaluate whether they have that knowledge or they have that wisdom inside of themselves. And so when you ask a classroom full of kindergartners or grade 1 students, what do you think is going to happen when I take this pot of water and I put it on a heat source like a stove or a flame or something like this, you'll get just a wide array of answers. Everything from, it's going to explode. There's always going to be that class clown that's going to swing for the fences and give something really extreme. But most students will say, well, I'm not sure. And if you ever watch students in that situation, they feel very unsettled. They're not necessarily anxious, although some of them will begin to exhibit a degree of anxiety. There's this sensation that within the student that there's something expected of them. And at that age, they're very concrete. They still think in terms of right and wrong, black and white, and they know that there's a right answer, but they also know that they don't know that answer, yet they're expected to know that answer. Well, in Ephesians chapter 6, this is exactly what Paul is talking about when he says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. The idea here is that we're not trying to push our children into a place where we have expectations on them and we have a demand that we place upon them which they're just not capable of meeting. And that's really at the heart of modern education, modern pedagogy, this idea that you need to look within yourself, you need to understand the answers as they come to you, as they merge within you. And when it comes to the example of a science experiment for a kindergarten grade 1 student, the example I've given you is actually really benign. It gets far more damaging and far more harmful as we consider things like gender identity or sexual orientation. Again, the idea is being pushed onto the student that the answers to questions they never even thought to ask are to be found within themselves. When it comes to classical education, what we find is that the method of education was rooted in a Christian worldview. And it goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. If you recall Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it says, in the beginning the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters of the deep. And then in verse 2, the very next thing it says is, God spoke. He spoke and he said, let there be